With so many people moving here to Tennessee from all over the country, today I wanted to do a video that sort of touched on what the legal aspects of real estate are here in Tennessee. The laws are different in every state, and I thought the best way to do that was to sit down with our in-house attorney, Griffin Dunham. Griffin is one of the owners of our sister title company, Momentum Title. He owns 3 different title companies. He's been an attorney for 22 years, and he's argued in front of the Supreme Court and won, right? Yes.
It's been a while, but yes.
It's been a while, but still, this is a guy to know. This is a guy we all go to here. And so welcome, Griffin. Thank you for doing this with me.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to get to my first question, guys. So in Tennessee, so this question came up for me because I came from other states.
Mm-hmm.
And in other states, you close with an escrow officer, and
Mm-hmm.
some of you may have experienced that as well. And then I got to Florida, and we closed with attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, you don't want your attorney in the deal. That means the deal is going south. But in other states where attorneys close deals, they're actually really helpful. And that's how it was when I got here to Tennessee. So I had to learn that the attorneys that are going to close the deals, not just the escrow officer. Is that?
Yes, some
correct?
states require attorneys. It's an absolute,
okay.
it's mandatory. In Tennessee, it's not required. So there are a lot of title companies that don't have any attorneys on staff. And that's okay. You can have a closer who is experienced and knowledgeable. It's just that some clients, since it's a major purchase or it's a major sale that they don't do very many times in their life, they want to have an attorney present to make sure that everything is compliant, everything is legal, and that they can explain it to the satisfaction of the buyer or the seller, so that when there's a closing, there's a little bit more confidence. There's a little bit more trust. We have 5 attorneys on staff, and we just find that from the agents and the buyers and the sellers, they're typically a little bit more comfortable with attorneys being present, even though it's not required.
Okay.
In Tennessee, at least.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, because in other states, it's
Mm-hmm.
like you're basically taking out a retainer to even have any questions answered. So just so you guys know, if you use a benchmark realty agent, and they close, your client closes, or you guys close with Momentum Title, you get free legal counsel basically on that deal. Right?
We have to hedge it. So we're not a law firm, so we can't give legal advice. The practical reality is that since we're attorneys, it's easy for us to give advice. And from an agent standpoint, you all know a lot of the answers. You just can't give the advice because it's the unlicensed and unauthorized practice of law. So we're there to be able to provide the same guidance that you would want to provide. You're just a little bit limited because you don't want to expose yourself.
Got it. Yep. That's what we hear from all of our brokers is don't practice law. You are not an attorney. So anyway, so it's really nice to have these guys where we can access, on the weekends, in the evenings, if there's something urgent going on with the deal, to keep everything smooth. So it is a big benefit, was a big selling point to me with going with Benchmark. So, so in what process, what is the process of closing? Like, how does that look? Because I know every state does something different.
It is different. So let's bifurcate it into front end and back end. On the back end, you've heard the saying, how the sausage is made. That's where a contract comes in. The first thing that a title company does is they order a title search. And there's an examiner who is appointed who goes to look at the real estate records and the chain of title to determine what liens or encumbrances, what has to be cleared in order for the seller to pass along good and marketable title to the buyer. There's an examiner that performs that search, lets us know what the property taxes are, if there are any delinquencies, what liens exist, what deeds of trust might exist out there that'll have to be paid off. And they provide us a search abstract. And our processors will then look at the search abstract and begin the process of what we refer to as processing the file. We have the closing date that's been identified in the contract, and then we'll reach out to buyers or sellers, depending upon which side we have, or both. Tennessee is a little bit different than some states because we have split closings. Buyer might be represented by one title company, seller might be represented by a different title company. And so if we're on either side, we'll reach out and just start getting some information. If it's from the seller, we have to know what the payoff is for an existing loan or deed of trust. So we'll get the contact information from for their lending institution. We'll get biographical information. We'll get the information that we need, and it's all digital. They can do it from the comfort of their own home and provide that information. If we're on the buyer side, we start working with the lender right away so that we can get clear to close and not be the delay in the closing process. From the buyer's perspective and seller's perspective, this is where it should be very hands-off. There shouldn't be much friction. There's enough stress, enough things to worry about that we don't want them worrying about the closing process. So we try to keep it simple. They should expect to provide information that is easily either readily available at their fingertips or a minimal amount of research. So overall, I would say between 2 and 3 hours of closing related work that they'll perform, and it should be submitted to them on somewhat of a silver platter so that their life isn't horribly inconvenienced or burdened.
Okay, that in a nutshell. Okay, next question. So I put together some questions that most people get or I've gotten over the years. So we'll just kind of keep moving through the list here. Helps with my glasses on too. What does title insurance protect a property owner from? Why is it important to have? This is more for new buyers, but I thought we would just address it for everyone.
And I get title insurance on any property that I buy. So I do so not because of any reason, because you don't know what happened historically with the property. I can look at a title search, I can look at the abstract and know everything about that property, but I don't know what happened to owners before. So the big things that a title policy protects against are, let's think about them. One is liens or encumbrances. If there's a judgment that's been against a prior owner that's attached to the real estate, if there's a deed of trust, well, examiners are humans, they're not perfect. So they can miss a lien so that when a prior closing occurs, that lien hasn't been satisfied. So it rolls over to the next property owner and still affects the property despite the fact that there's been a change of ownership. And so a buyer in that situation could make a title claim, and then the insurance carrier, in our situation, our underwriter would pay off that lien so that the buyer wouldn't have to clear that encumbrance so that the property didn't get foreclosed upon. So those are major ones: liens and encumbrances that have not been satisfied because of a prior closing, forgeries and frauds. It's fairly common these days for there to be fraud attempts on a property. It's less common for there to be actual fraud. However, if you own property and someone fraudulently conveys it, it's still your property. Just because someone else has fraudulently conveyed it, they haven't actually conveyed it because it's void at the time that the fraud occurs. So it's as though the transaction never happened. And so then the property keeps passing despite the fact that there's been a fraud or a forgery, and title insurance protects against that. So if there has been a fraud or forgery, then certainly a claim can be made and that buyer can be made whole. Next line is unmarketable property that doesn't have vehicular or pedestrian access, so it's considered landlocked. And then the other big one is if there is lack of authority by a conveying party. So if you're a seller, there might be a bankruptcy in the past, there might be a divorce, there might be a death in the family, and not all the heirs signed a document. So that property didn't transfer with the full grants or with full authority from the people that had an interest in the property. And you're not going to know that just from looking at the meets and bounds, driving at the property, making sure there are no encroachments, seeing the different iron pins. You can find all those, but you just don't know what happened potentially decades prior to your ownership that could now resurrect themselves into an issue during your period of ownership. So considering the fact that it's cheap insurance, relatively speaking, especially if there's a lender involved. Tennessee has what's called simultaneous issue. So a lender is always going to get a policy. And then the owner can get a rider policy on top of that for just pennies on the dollar, for just a few $100s. And they get the same level of protection that the lender would get. So if you're going to finance a property, just know that you don't have an option for there to be a lender's policy. They're going to require it, or they're not going to give a loan. And then your owner's policy is just mere pennies compared to that.
Okay, but they're both basically the same coverage. It's just the lender has sort of the, I guess the main, or the main.
Yeah, the lender has an interest in the property. They have collateral, so they have a loan, they have a promissory note secured by a deed of trust. They want to make sure that the property their collateral is good. And so if it's not, for some reason, if there's a title defect, well, the next best thing that they have instead of the property is a claim against a major underwriter who is perpetually solvent, who can pay out that claim.
Mhm.
So it's just a secondary way for the lender to protect itself in the event that there is a title defect.
Okay. Okay. There's going to be some more title questions. I can't remember if I put them in this part or not, but so can the buyer use an existing policy?
The buyer can piggyback off an existing policy. So you can't transfer policies from one person to another. But in Tennessee, we have reissue credits. So you go back to 10 years. If the period of ownership is 10 years or less, then the current buyer, it's not necessarily the current buyer, it's whoever is paying title. That buyer is going to get an insurance policy. Whoever is paying for title can get a discount off the issuance of a new policy to the new owner if there is an existing policy in place that's less than 10 years old, and we can get a copy of that policy. It's called a reissue credit for all those that are taking notes here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's tons out
Right,
there
I'm sure.
taking all these legal notes. So, okay. So what are the standard closing fees? I guess we'll start with that one. What are the standard closing fees here in Tennessee?
The ones that we've seen range from $495 to $600, and it depends on sometimes the zip code. It depends on the staffing. It's really an individual decision from each of the title agents, from each of the title companies. I'd say your standard rate, I think we've averaged it out, and it's $550.
Okay. And I don't want to get that confused, guys, with your closing costs. This is the closing fee to the closing company, the title company that's doing your closing. That's not your taxes, your prorates on your any HOAs or anything like that. So it's not that cheap in Tennessee. You're still going to have some bigger closing costs than $600. But so how long is title insurance good for?
As long as you own the property.
Okay. And then, so if anything happens to that property, say there's a judgment on it or a lien or anything, that gets recorded against it. So when you go to sell it or the next buyer buys it, it's going to show up in their title search that you did something with the property. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So we are going to move on to LLCs.
Okay.
Yeah. Super exciting.